Welcome back to Curiosity Not Judgment. Birgit and Gary with you for another episode. And today we wanted to talk about curiosity in issues of health. So this morning I was at the gym and got a text from a friend that needed urgent care. She had broken a glass of some kind, thought she had stepped wide enough to avoid the glass on the floor and ended up, stepping right on a really sharp piece of it. It went deep into her foot and on and on and on. So I go to pick her up. I go to the closest emergency room where we're told it's going to be a 10-hour wait, and then transition to go to urgent care, hoping that we can get in sooner. And just the situation that we have right now, present day, and I hope that if somebody's watching this 5 years after we record it, that this is like, what are you talking about? What's going on? What's the problem? Well, we're 2 years into COVID, just right? 2 years into COVID, and it's changed everything. It's changed how we get medical care. It's changed the way healthcare is done in general. And it is getting difficult to get the level of care that maybe was present 4 or 5 years ago. Things have been so drastically altered that it's hard to envision what it's going to look like in another year's time. My pessimism tends to make me think that it's just going to go downhill from here. I hope and I pray that that's not the case, but we hear stories about medical professionals quitting in droves. And so, there's a little bit of fear, I think, in me that's causing me to want to stay healthy above all. But when something happens, when you get sick, whether it's a virus, a bacteria, or God forbid, a more serious life-altering situation, we've got a whole nother world to deal with right now in terms of being our own best advocate and trying to advocate for quality care. You and I have both gone through some things, you much more seriously than I, but we all have our medical stories. You went through a potentially life-critical cancer situation, and you had to be your own best advocate, because were you to go on the judgment of one, you might not be sitting here.
That's right. No, and it was a prostate cancer, and it was in age 46, which they don't even start checking for that until age 50. So there's a lot of reasons why I shouldn't be here, and it's just a miracle that I even got tested. And if I would have gone with the original diagnosis and the original doctor's recommendation, I'm convinced I wouldn't be here. And so it's really important to keep your questions going. And you just mentioned advocate for yourself and for others. The best thing you can do for a friend or a loved one a relative, is to go with them to doctor's appointments, especially on serious matters.
If you're allowed in the day and age of COVID.
And this is another thing that's changing.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of times when we are not being allowed into situations where even before you would have been allowed in at least one other person, if not more. And so it makes it even more difficult because, and I've heard of situations recently where, okay, we'll let one person in, but you have to assign that one person. It's usually a spouse. That spouse can't be there 24 hours. I mean, You can't even do shifts with people anymore who are in the hospital because that person has to sleep. And there's so many things that happen. A situation with my own mother, when I was in there watching a nurse toward the end of her life, she had a terminal cancer that actually took her. And there was a nurse that came in and was about to do something. I had seen it so many times. I knew she was doing it improperly. And I said, ho, stop. And if she'd have just done it, it would have been her instant demise. And so and that's not against the medical profession at all. It's just a matter of there's so much value in having advocates and people with you. I guarantee when you're a patient, and when I was first diagnosed with my cancer, the doctor who diagnosed me, first of all, I hadn't looked at the results. And so we were bantering back and forth. And then he says, well, at least now we know and then looked at the screen and said, oh, crap. And then proceeded to tell me how I probably only had less than 6 months to live. I had to chart a course. And it was about 45 minutes that he talked to me afterwards. I can't remember a single word of it.
Your
After
mind
oh
goes
crap.
blank. Yeah.
And if I really wish somebody would have been there with me.
Yeah.
And I wasn't in any position to even call anybody at that point. Wasn't expecting anything, but certainly thereafter, I tried to take my spouse or one of my kids or somebody to go with me, and back then you could. And so the point is, be an advocate for a friend or a loved one or a family member, and advocate for yourself too. Make sure, don't take someone's judgment or someone's initial diagnosis, especially, the old story goes, to diagnose before you prescribe. And in this day and age, when you've got burned out people, it's much easier to just jump to a judgment or a diagnosis and then move on because people are burned out, they don't have as much time, etc. And you don't have your good old family doctor that's known everything about you and knows what's up with you and what your nuances are. And do you automatically say my pain level's a 10 when it's really a 2 or a 4 and you're just a wimp, or vice versa? Do you never complain about pain? And so, it's very difficult for someone to come in. The old story was, you go to your optometrist and they say, oh, you're having vision problems, and they just hand you their glasses and say, here, these work for me, this will work for you. No, I want you to diagnose me specifically. It's harder and harder to interface with a health system and get a really good quality diagnosis. And you have to diagnose before you prescribe. You have to diagnose before you say what's the best treatment. And what are the best treatment options? Because there isn't one size that fits all, as much as we would like to do. My own situation was, I had my urologist saying that surgery was the only way to go. I had my radiologist say that radiation was the only way to go, and my oncologist saying that
Chemo.
the form of chemo, which is hormone therapy for prostate cancer, is the only way to go. What do you do, and how do you discern that?
Right.
And so we, in a time where we have to depend on our experts for what's going on, and the experts disagree, then what do you do? And the only way to do that is to get multiple inputs with an advocate sitting next to you, because I guarantee they're going to hear different things than you do.
Oh, absolutely. It reminds me that no one knows you better than you.
Exactly.
Second best would probably be your spouse or a child.
Right.
My situation, not nearly as serious, but I had a spot on the top of my head that just when I brushed my fingers through my hair, I felt it, and just something told me, something inside said, you should get that looked at. So I go to the dermatologist, and they, burn it off or scrape it off or whatever it was, and didn't have any follow-up needs that were presented to me anyway. And about 6 months later, I feel it again. The doctor says something like, oh, I'm sure it's fine. It looks fine. And so fast forward another 6 months, and it's still there. I still feel it, and I just know something's not right. And I say to the dermatologist, I said, this is not going away. And so kind of begrudgingly biopsies it, and lo and behold, I now have a melanoma on top of my head. And, as skin cancers go, that's the one you don't want to have. And so that ended up being an ordeal. And thank God it was dealt with. But if I had not advocated for myself, if I had not listened to that little something that was saying, this isn't right, I don't know what would have happened in terms of, the quickness of how a melanoma can spread. And I actually know somebody my same age range that died about 10 years ago from a melanoma that went internal. And so this is not a mess around situation. And so the self-advocacy, or spousal or child or whoever, your appointed person advocacy is huge. And because of the way that things are being forced online now, oftentimes we have televisits. You're not actually being able to be present with the doctor. And so this opens up a whole conversation. And I know we've talked about online stuff in the past, but, there is now this kind of meshing of online and medical. And then, what happens when we start to do too much research in the medical field and, the headache all of a sudden is a brain tumor and you think you're going to die and you're insistent with your doctor that you've got a brain tumor. And I mean, it seems to go from one extreme to another, from complete lack of care to saturation of information. And so how do we get to a healthy place for us mentally and physically while still being, curious enough to do the research, but not getting trapped into the, oh gosh, I'm about to die because of this symptom that I just Googled online.
Right. And I think the key to that, again, is to ask questions and to say, and it's okay to say percentages too, and use those appropriately. But sometimes you are the 5%, and because someone is.
Sure.
And so it's really important to self-advocate. I had a snowboarding accident where I broke my elbow. This is a standing family joke because everybody says, you didn't break your elbow, you're fine. They didn't see anything in the x-rays. Years later, my elbow locked up. And I'm a volleyball player. I play tennis. I play softball at the time. And I went into one of the more prominent doctors in town. And the intern came in and they took an x-ray and they came back and he says, we don't see anything. So, what are you doing? And I'm playing all these sports and it's now, very different and it's locking up and it's not working properly. And he says, you probably just worn it out. You're kind of old, aren't you? And I'm looking at this kid like, come on, dude, and so then the doctor comes in and he says, so how's it going in here? And I said,
I guess I'm old.
Doctor, and I'm not going to say his name, although it's a good story for him. I said, my elbow's not working like it used to. It's significantly changed. I don't know what it is. It's locking up at times. It's painful. And he says, so, and he looks at the intern and says, did you do an x-ray? And he goes, yeah. He says, what did it show? He says, nothing. And he says, so what's your diagnosis? He goes, I just think he's old. He's worn it out. And he goes, but he's telling you something's radically different. And he says, yeah. And he says, go do blah, 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 blah x-ray. And he comes back in. And so then now the doctor and the intern are there. The doctor puts up the x-ray and goes, do you think that's a problem? And sure enough, a part of the bone had separated as a chip. My body, trying to protect me, grew some stuff around the bone and it was in a position of locking it up. And he goes, you think we ought to get that out of there? And the guy goes, yeah, probably. So it was one of those things. I could have just taken my diagnosis and left, right?
Yeah.
And
had a rest of your life with a bum arm.
Exactly. And thank God we didn't. So I think it is self-advocacy, not over-advocacy, and not, hey, I know this is a brain tumor when you have no basis for it. But if something's radically changed, again, like you said, you know yourself and you know something has changed and something is different. And again, each person has their own level and threshold of pain and we have to take those into account. But doctors need to diagnose before they prescribe, and it's just an interesting place where we are with telemedicine. And so, I always tend to give more information than they probably even want. And I'll even say up front, look, I'm just going to tell you everything just because I don't know what I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know what's important here. And so I'm just going to say a bunch of stuff and maybe that'll help give a clue. And maybe it's nothing, but I'd like for you to have all the information.
Yeah. I really hope that we end up with some medical professionals that listen to this episode and it really prompts them to take a posture of curiosity in their practice, because that's one thing I really want to advocate for in all professions, but especially the medical profession, because I know, or at least I think I know, I'm hearing the stories of just the fatigue, just the overwork, understaffed, and how that mentality, regardless of where you work, will drive to quick judgments, will drive to kind of underperforming, underthinking. And so I know, as you say, somebody's the 5%, right? Maybe only 5% of patients that present with this symptom have the, factor X. But gosh, do I want my doctor to be the one to do the tests and to probe deeper to make sure I'm not the 5%? Because, this is life that we're talking about. And so I don't know. I guess just my plea, my hope in all of this and this whole series is going to be for anyone listening to any episode to really have that question of themselves. Like, am I taking a curious stance in the way that I do life, whether it be in a family setting, excuse me, in professional setting, and especially for professionals whose entire career drastically impacts the livelihood, the life of somebody else. And so I don't know, other thoughts about the medical community and just this whole curiosity, not judgment factor?
Be careful when you're in a system that seems to drive and reward certain behavior when you have a gut feel that that may be not the best behavior. I can tell you right now, and again, there's no evil people, but we have people who are in systems that get rewarded for certain things.
Sure.
I guarantee right now, doctors and medical professionals are being rewarded for quick diagnoses, for judgments, for performing less tests, not more, and throughput. And all of those things are against what you just said about taking that little extra time and finding that person who is in the 5%, and doing a proper diagnosis and proper treatment. And again, this is not against, we're for the medical profession. We know they're burned out.
Yeah.
Just be careful. If you're in a system that rewards the behavior that's going to make you miss something, that's the time to be hyper aware and hyper curious. And that would just be my caution. And that's not just the medical profession, that's everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay to question the system. We all live in systems, and we are all part of systems.
Yeah.
And it's okay to raise your hand and say, is this the best process here? Is this the best reward system we have? Are we getting the results that we want to get? Is this the intended outcome and consequences? It's the old saying is every organization is perfectly designed to get the results it's getting. And if you're looking at the outcomes, if you're looking at the results and not seeing the desired results, it's time to question the system. And I think that's still a big place of curiosity, not judgment, and saying, what could we do better here?
Yeah.
How could we improve these outcomes by making this small tweak over here or this major change over here?
Yeah. I want to transition just a few degrees from, our own medical issues to medical issues of somebody in our space, whether that's somebody in our family, extended circles in our workplace. I've had a number of situations over the last few years where somebody's had a serious illness and they've made a choice to do a particular kind of treatment that to me just doesn't make any sense. And I have to really watch it, that I don't let my judgment cloud relationship and healthy communication, because ultimately it's the concern, right, that's driving us to think, oh, well, why aren't you doing XYZ? You'd get better if you did XYZ. But they've chosen to do a different path or take a different path. And then fear sets in, anger sets in, and it compromises relationship. And I would imagine that all of us have had somebody, whether it be a close somebody or a more distant somebody, they've had a cancer diagnosis and they've elected to do a homeopathic treatment, or they've had some sort of a very serious situation where they're choosing non-traditional medical ways to deal with it, and the frustration sets in, and that judgment can creep up really quickly in those cases.
Very quickly. And we have to just remember that everybody's on their own journey, and they are who they are, and to do differently would be different. And woe to the person who cajoles or twists somebody's arm to do something and it's not the right path.
Right.
So for me, it starts with acceptance and love for the person regardless of their choice. And I think it's okay to ask questions. How did you arrive at that decision? Have you looked at all the options? Are you just tired of making this decision and just pick one? That's okay.
Yeah.
But I think it's okay to ask those questions too, if you're very concerned. I don't think it's okay to say, that's a ridiculous course of behavior, you ought to do this. Because I don't think we are qualified to do that.
Right.
I'm not sure, again, we have to trust our professionals and people who study things. And I tend to always look for somebody who thinks about this all day long, especially if I don't.
Right.
Right. And
Yeah.
and I always look for the experts, and I always look for the local experts if I'm in another place, because there's nuances and culture differences and other things too that go on.
Sure.
But it's very important to let people make their own decisions. The old joke about there's 3 ways to get something done: do it yourself, delegate it, or tell your kids not to do it. There's a difference between authoritative telling somebody to do something and influence.
Yeah.
And I think my success in management and leadership actually came because I had kids young. And you have to learn that pretty quickly with kids, is that influence versus authoritarianism, because nobody learns in authoritarianism. People learn in asking questions. People learn in helping people investigate things, letting them go a little bit down that path, even if you think you don't agree with it. Because if somebody just does what you say their whole lives, where's their thinking? Where's their critical thinking skills? How are they developing and growing on their own? You have to let people make their own judgments and mistakes sometimes. Now, if it's life or death medical situations, it becomes more important, or does it? People are going to be on their own paths, and we have to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're doing the best they can.
Right. Yeah, that they want health. Yeah. So this is kind of a combo statement question with the online conversation and the health conversation. So COVID, again, COVID has changed everything. We could say this every possible episode because it impacts everything that we're talking about. But when it comes to people making health decisions surrounding COVID, this is a huge area where judgment has caused major divide. From the very first, vaccine or no vaccine, mask or no mask. How do you choose to treat your body if you have COVID? Do you go to the hospital? Do you avoid the hospital? And I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook. I have needed it many times for business issues over the last number of years. Like I actually have projects that are Facebook driven, so I have to be on there. But it just grieves my heart to see people that at least know each other through Facebook, and that just the judgment just rammed at people when they make a statement like, hey, me and my family came down with COVID, please pray for us. And then 15 comments below are really snarky about, well, I bet you guys didn't get vaccinated. I don't even know what to say about it. It's hard. It's heartbreaking.
We need to encourage people and take care of people who are sick. Just like we don't criticize the poor for being poor. You don't criticize someone for being sick, regardless of how they got there, in my mind. And so, again, I think this is a prime example of where curiosity is so much better than judgment. And I think that, the more we can, get past the judgment and just care for people, and just love on people, support people, tell them that we're for them constantly, that has to make a better world than just hurling insults and judgments at people. I'm convinced that that's true. And so, am I perfect at it? By no means. Am I working on it daily? Absolutely, because I do believe that the more we can encourage, the more we can practice curiosity, not judgment, the better off we in our little corner of the world and society, community, and the world will be. I'm seeing the results of judgment, and they're not good. And I can't judge somebody for not being curious and being judgmental, because that belies the point.
Right.
So all I can do is be curious in my corner of the world and approach activities, people, and circumstances with curiosity and acceptance. You can fight everything. It's pretty tiring.
Yeah.
I've done it. You can struggle, you can strive, or you can just be and ask questions and encourage as much as possible. I think it's a lighter, more joy-filled life to do the latter.
Mm.
That's my opinion.
Yeah.
That's part of the purpose of this series
Mm-hmm.
and of the book is to help people investigate that.
Yeah.
Take what's useful and leave the rest. But the purpose is to cause thought and to help people develop their own vision for their own lives about how they would like to behave and act in this world.
Mm. I do not suggest doing this in an online setting, but if you are aware of somebody in your circle of influence that has kind of exhibited some of those harsh, judgmental statements online, like you see, your kid or a coworker or somebody post one of those judgmental statements on an online setting, how might we, in person later on, help corral them a little? Not corral's the wrong word. How might we help them to consider their posture online and encourage them towards asking questions and being curious? How do we help people step into this lifestyle?
The most effective way, there are other ways, ban them from Facebook, right? Is not the way. Doesn't matter what the platform is, Facebook and those other things are just amplified human interactions. The best, most effective way, in my mind, in my experience, is to role model it. And the way you role model it is to ask them questions. So how'd that work out for you? How did you, and not in a judgmental way either, like I just did there, but more in a, hey, is that what Facebook is about? And do you think that's what the purpose of it is? Is there ways to encourage people without being judgmental? The whole point though is, first of all, you can't even with your body language come at them judgmental.
Sure.
I find that my first act when I'm approaching somebody, if I want a change in behavior, if I want my agenda or whatever, is to practice empathy. You must come at it first by asking how they're doing and what's going on in their lives, and making sure that they can express that. Then you're in a place where you have built some trust and you've built a little bit of a bridge, a little bit of a common area where then we can discuss things and talk about things. So the whole point is not to go after somebody to try to change the way they are online. It's to relate to them as a person, and then eventually maybe influence them in a way that might help them be less negative online. But that doesn't, again, being effective with people and efficient with things, being effective with a person is not to come at them with something, with a sledgehammer. It's never going to work.
Right.
It has to come with the empathy and the trust building. And it's the same thing as, if your best friend says something to you, you're going to take it as input and feedback. If your worst enemy is, you're going to reject it out of hand. And it could be the exact same thing.
That's right.
So the first thing is to be friends with people, to have relationships with people, to really be for people. And then, as that goes, then you can get into real dialogue, as we talked about in the first one, dialogos, meaning moving through instead of discussion and beating each other over the head with ideas. Because that's the only way that real progress or growth ever happens, is through relationship.
I had somebody ask me recently if there was a tagline that we were going to use for Curiosity, Not Judgment, and I just thought of one. So see what you think about this as kind of a wrap up for today. Be kind, be curious, change the world.
That's good. That I think the only way to change the world for the better, if that's your implied statement, would change the world, is to be kind and be curious. And I think that imagine a world, go back to John Lennon, imagine a world where people were kind and curious, and how we would be less on our guard, and it would help us be kind and curious also.
Yeah.
Oftentimes when I walk into a situation where everybody's got their fists up, I'm going to naturally put my fists up.
Right.
If you walk into a place where everybody's being kind and laughing, I might be kind and laugh.
So set the stage for it. All right. good place to wrap for today. So thank you once again for hanging out with us on Curiosity, Not Judgment. Please do visit the website if you've got any questions or comments, curiositynotjudgment.com, and we'll see you next time.
Take good care.